June 14, 1944. The thick hedgerows of Normandy's Bocage region. Private First Class Michael Thornton from the 28th Infantry Division pushed his face against the cold ground, breathing carefully as sweat rolled down the side of his face. Looking through his rifle scope, he spotted a German Panzer tank commander who was barely visible as he watched the battlefield from his slightly opened hatch. The enormous tank stayed mostly hidden behind a massive hedgerow, showing only the turret and commander for a few seconds. Basic sniper training taught him to wait for a clearer shot or avoid targeting tanks altogether. His commanding officer had specifically told all snipers to focus only on foot soldiers. Tanks were for the tank destroyers and bazooka squads. But Thornton had watched 7 American Sherman tanks get destroyed along this road since sunrise. 7 crews with 5 men each meant 35 dead soldiers. From his high position in an abandoned farmhouse attic, he could see something the Sherman crews couldn't see. 3 more Panzers were hiding in ambush just around the corner. His radio buzzed with instructions. All sniper teams keep focusing on foot soldiers. Leave tanks to the tank destroyers. Again, do not target tanks. Thornton's spotter, Corporal James Miller, looked at him nervously. Orders are orders, Mike. Thornton's hand shook slightly as he reached down to grab the small tin cup next to him, filled with dirty water he had gathered earlier. The morning sun hit the surface of the cloudy liquid, creating a perfect blinding flash toward the hedge where the tank commander stood partly exposed. The German officer squinted, briefly distracted by the unexpected glint of light. In that moment, Thornton understood that disobeying direct commands could destroy his military career or save dozens of American soldiers advancing up the road below. His finger pressed on the trigger. Michael Thornton grew up in rural Nebraska, the 3rd son of a wheat farmer who had served briefly in World War I. His childhood was shaped by endless open skis and the patient labor of working fields with his father and brothers. What set young Michael apart from his siblings was his remarkable eyesight and rock-steady hands, natural gifts that made him an outstanding hunter from childhood. By 12, he provided meat for the family table during the toughest Depression years, hitting rabbits at distances that amazed even his father's old war friends who sometimes visited. When Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7, 1941, Michael had already spent 3 years working at the local hardware store, saving money while helping his family through continuing financial struggles. He signed up the very next day, among the first in his county to do so. Despite his obvious shooting skills shown during basic training, the Army first assigned him to a regular infantry unit. Only after reaching England in early 1943 did an observant lieutenant notice his exceptional shooting during practice and recommended him for specialized sniper training. The training was demanding, far beyond standard shooting instruction. Thornton learned to calculate wind drift, elevation changes, and the ballistic performance of the M1903A4 Springfield rifle he was given. He practiced breathing control, trigger discipline, and the patience needed to stay perfectly still for hours. What truly set him apart, though, wasn't just technical ability, but his natural understanding of light and shadow, knowledge gained from years of hunting at dawn and dusk across the Nebraska plains. His fellow trainees nicknamed him Farmer Mike, often underestimating him because of his quiet manner and rural roots. Many came from cities or had previous experience with competitive shooting. Thornton rarely talked about his abilities, but during field exercises, he consistently discovered shooting positions others missed and made hits considered nearly impossible by his instructors. By the time he joined the 28th Infantry Division in January 1944, Thornton had built a reputation as a sniper who thought differently. While others focused only on range estimation and wind calls, he studied how light moved through different environments, how it bounced off surfaces, and how to use natural elements to his advantage. His commanding officers valued his skills, but found his unconventional approaches sometimes frustrating. Stick to the manual, they would tell him. The techniques are proven. In the months before D-Day, Thornton and other snipers trained intensively for the expected conditions of the Normandy invasion. However, the dense hedgerow country they encountered after pushing inland from the beaches had been poorly covered in their preparation. These ancient field boundaries, tall dirt mounds topped with thick vegetation and trees, created a maze-like battlefield unlike anything they had trained for. Traditional sniping positions and techniques often proved useless in this compartmentalized terrain where visibility was frequently limited to less than 100 yards. During the first week of fighting in the Bocage, Thornton watched with increasing frustration as German tanks dominated the battlefield, using the hedgerows as perfect concealment for devastating ambushes against advancing American tanks and infantry. Standard doctrine provided no effective solution. Something would have to change if they were to break through this deadly maze. The Normandy campaign following the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, had quickly turned into one of the most difficult battlefields of World War II. The ancient Norman landscape with its distinctive bocage hedgerows transformed what military planners had expected to be a fast breakout into a grinding meter-by-meter struggle that favored the defending German forces. These hedgerows, some dating back to Roman times, were no simple shrubs but massive dirt banks up to 15 feet tall, topped with centuries-old trees and dense vegetation, creating natural fortifications around each small field. For American forces pushing inland from the beaches, the bocage presented a nightmare situation. The landscape was divided into thousands of small fields separated by these living walls, creating a natural maze that forced attacking forces down narrow, predictable paths. Each field became a potential killing zone, with German defenders able to prepare interlocking fields of fire and perfect ambush positions. The Panzer units of the German army, particularly elements of the 12th SS Panzer Division and the Panzer Lehr Division, had quickly adapted to this terrain. German tank commanders used the hedgerows as natural tank defenses, positioning their Panzer IVs and fearsome Panthers so that only their turrets and gun barrels were exposed above or through the dense vegetation. This reduced their vulnerability while allowing them to fire with devastating effect on American tanks, forced to use the narrow roads and gaps between fields. American Sherman tanks, already outgunned by superior German armor, found themselves at an even greater disadvantage in this environment. The Sherman's relatively thin armor and high profile made them easy targets, while their 75 guns often struggled to pierce the frontal armor of German panzers. Furthermore, when Sherman tanks tried to crash through the hedgerows, they frequently exposed their vulnerable undersides as they climbed, creating perfect targets for German anti-tank gunners. By mid-June 1944, the offensive had slowed into a series of bloody small unit actions. American casualties mounted alarmingly as each hedgerow had to be cleared individually, often at terrible cost. The expected rapid advance toward St. Lo, and then Cairnton had stalled, worrying General Omar Bradley and the Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower. Intelligence reports showed that the German army was using the slow Allied advance to strengthen defensive positions and bring up reinforcements. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding German forces in Normandy, had recognized the defensive value of the bocage and was expertly using it to blunt the Allied offensive despite overall German numerical inferiority. For the men of the 28th Infantry Division, recently arrived in the combat zone, the statistics were sobering. Average advances had slowed to sometimes less than 1,000 yards per day. Tank losses were approaching 20% of committed armor, with crew survival rates significantly lower than expected. The specialized equipment designed for the invasion had proven largely ineffective in this unexpected terrain, and new tactics were being developed on the fly, often by junior officers and even enlisted men at the front lines. Standard doctrine for American snipers in this environment focused on targeting German officers, radio operators, and machine gun crews, traditional high-value infantry targets. Armored vehicles were considered outside a sniper's area of responsibility, to be dealt with by tanks, tank destroyers, or bazooka teams. This division of battlefield responsibilities made sense in conventional terrain, but was proving problematic in the compartmentalized battle space of the bocage, where coordination between different combat elements was extremely difficult. As American forces prepared for yet another push to break through the hedgerow country in mid-June, the limitations of existing tactics were becoming increasingly clear to men like Michael Thornton, who witnessed firsthand the cost of failing to adapt to this unique battlefield. Dawn broke misty and cool over the Norman countryside on June 14, 1944. Michael Thornton and his spotter, James Miller, had moved into position well before first light, climbing through the pre-dawn darkness to the partially collapsed attic of an abandoned stone farmhouse that offered a commanding view over several connected fields and a crucial crossroads. Their mission, as briefed the previous evening, was straightforward: Provide overwatch for Baker Company's advance along the main road, focusing on eliminating German observers and machine gun positions. Captain Lawrence, the company commander, had been explicit during the briefing. Our tank support is limited to 3 Shermans. Intelligence suggests at least 1 enemy tank in the area, possibly more. Tank destroyer support is committed elsewhere. Snipers will focus exclusively on infantry targets, especially officers and observers. Leave any tanks to the bazookas and our own tanks. Thornton had nodded along with the other snipers, but a growing concern had been building within him over the past several days of combat. He had watched as German armor repeatedly devastated American units by remaining hull down behind hedgerows, with only their commanders briefly exposing themselves to direct operations. These momentary exposures seemed like potential opportunities, but doctrine and direct orders forbade engaging armor. "I don't like this position," Miller whispered as they settled into the dusty attic. "Too obvious. German artillery will target this farmhouse if they spot movement. That's why we're not moving," Thornton replied, carefully arranging his equipment. Alongside his rifle, ammunition, and canteen, he placed a small tin cup filled with water collected from a rain barrel below. When Miller raised an eyebrow, Thornton simply said, "Thirsty work ahead." Through his binoculars, Miller scanned the landscape coming alive with early light. Baker Company moving up now, right on schedule. Thornton observed the American infantry advancing cautiously along the sunken road, 3 Sherman tanks spaced among them. The morning mist hung in the hollows between hedgerows, giving the battlefield an eerily beautiful quality that hid the danger within the fog. The radio crackled with routine communications as the advance proceeded. Thornton continued his systematic scan of the terrain ahead of the American forces. During one such sweep, he noticed a subtle disruption in the foliage atop a hedgerow approximately 800 yards distant, a small section where the leaves moved slightly differently than those stirred by the light breeze. "Contact possible," he whispered. "Hedgerow 800 yards, northeast quadrant, something's there." Miller trained his binoculars on the area. "I don't see—" "Wait, you're right. Disturbed vegetation could be an observation post." A flash of morning sunlight reflecting off metal interrupted him. For just a moment, the distinctive outline of a Panzer commander's cap and the top portion of his binoculars were visible above the hedge. "Tank commander," Thornton confirmed quietly. "Panzer using the hedgerow as cover probably has a clear shot at the road junction. Should I call it in?" Miller asked, reaching for the radio. "Not yet. We need to confirm." As if in answer, the distant sound of grinding metal reached them, the unmistakable sound of a tank rotating its turret. Through his scope, Thornton caught another brief glimpse of the tank commander directing his gunner toward the approaching American column, still unaware they were heading into an ambush. Miller was already on the radio. "Baker 6, this is Sniper 2. Possible armor threat, vicinity grid coordinate Delta 47. Commander visible, vehicle hull down behind northeast hedgerow." "Over." The response came back immediately. "Sniper 2, hold position and continue observation. Will relay to armor. Maintain focus on infantry targets. Out." Thornton watched as the minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. The Sherman tanks and infantry continued their advance, now less than 500 yards from the hidden Panzer's position. There was no sign the warning had reached them or been acted upon. "They're not stopping," Miller whispered urgently. "Should we try again?" Before Thornton could answer, a second Panzer commander appeared briefly above a different section of the same hedgerow, approximately 30 yards left of the first, and then a third even further left. 3 Panzers in ambush position," Thornton said, his voice tight. "Our boys are driving right into it." Miller was back on the radio immediately, his voice more urgent as he reported the additional threats. The response was the same: hold position, information relayed, continue mission. But something was wrong. The Shermans weren't changing course or taking up defensive positions. Either they hadn't received the warning or communications were breaking down in the confusion of the advance. Thornton watched the lead Sherman approach the fatal intersection. The German tank commanders were now more frequently visible, coordinating their ambush. In moments, the killing would begin. "Range 820 yards to first commander," Thornton said quietly, making tiny adjustments to his scope. "Wind negligible." "Mike, what are you doing?" Miller hissed. "Orders are clear. We don't engage armor." "We're not engaging armor," Thornton replied, his eye fixed to the scope. "Just the commander. That's not the mission." Captain Lawrence was explicit. "If those Shermans hit that intersection without warning, we'll lose all 3 tanks and half the company." Thornton's mind raced. The Panzer commanders were visible only occasionally and partially, not enough for a clean shot at this range. Even if he could hit one, the others would immediately button up and still execute their ambush. He needed something more, something to create an opportunity. That's when he noticed how the early morning sun was positioned almost directly behind them, its rays streaming through the broken attic window. The German tankers would be looking almost directly into that sun when scanning toward the American advance. "I need to try something," Thornton whispered, reaching for the tin cup of water he had positioned beside him. "What are you doing?" Miller asked, creating an opportunity. Thornton angled the small cup of muddy water, watching as the morning sunlight caught its surface. By carefully adjusting the position, he directed a reflection, a quick, deliberate flash of light toward the position of the 1st Panzer commander. Through his scope, he saw the German officer react immediately, standing slightly higher in his hatch, raising his binoculars toward the source of the unexpected light. For a crucial second, the man's torso was exposed above the hedgerow. Thornton exhaled softly, his finger taking up the trigger slack. The Springfield cracked, its report echoing across the Norman countryside. 800 yards away, the Panzer commander's body went suddenly limp, slumping half out of the hatch. Through his scope, Thornton could see confusion in the tank as a crewman reached up to pull their commander back inside. "Target down," Thornton said calmly, already working the bolt to chamber another round. "Radio Baker Company. Tell them precise location of Panzer threat. Commander neutralized, but vehicle still operational." Miller stared at him for a moment, then grabbed the radio. "Baker 6, Sniper 2. Enemy armor confirmed, Delta 47. Commander neutralized, but vehicle operational. Recommend immediate evasive action. 2 additional Panzers vicinity, same hedgerow. Over." This time the response was immediate. The lead Sherman abruptly halted, then reversed into a concealing dip in the road. The infantry scattered to defensive positions along the adjacent hedge. "They got the message," Miller confirmed. "But Mike, you just violated direct orders." Thornton was already repositioning his cup of water, creating another calculated reflection toward the 2nd Panzer, where the commander was now visible, clearly trying to understand the situation with his neighboring tank. "Sometimes you have to choose between following orders and doing what's right," Thornton replied as the 2nd German tank commander unwittingly exposed himself just enough. The Springfield cracked again. The morning of June 14th unfolded into one of the most remarkable displays of sniper innovation in the European theater. After the first 2 Panzer commanders fell to Thornton's rifle, the situation rapidly evolved into a deadly game of cat and mouse across the Norman hedgerows. The German tanks, suddenly stripped of leadership and coordination, attempted to regroup and identify the threat. A 3rd Panzer commander, approximately 900 yards distant, emerged more fully from his hatch, standing to get a better view of the situation unfolding with his companion tanks. Thornton's mud reflection technique worked again. A brief, calculated flash of light from the angled cup drew the Germans' attention directly toward the farmhouse. The momentary distraction and slight repositioning provided just enough of a target. 3 commanders down, Thornton reported calmly, working the bolt on his rifle. But they'll adapt quickly. Miller, having moved past his initial shock at Thornton's decision to engage the tank commanders, was now fully committed to their new mission. He spotted a 4th Panzer attempting to maneuver to a new position, its commander necessarily exposed as he directed his driver through a narrow gap between hedgerows. "New target, moving east to west through gap. Range approximately 750 yards, Miller called out, his binoculars fixed on the vehicle. Thornton swung his rifle to the new position, but the angle was wrong for his reflection technique. The commander was visible but moving erratically as the tank navigated the difficult terrain. "Hold steady," Thornton whispered to himself, tracking the target, calculating lead and drop. The Springfield's report echoed across the fields once more. Through his scope, he watched the German officer clutch his chest and fall backward into the tank. By this time, the American forces had recognized the opportunity created by Thornton's unexpected intervention. A radio message crackled through. "Sniper 2, this is Baker 6. Continue your engagement if possible. Tank destroyer support inbound but delayed. You're saving lives. Out." The implied permission to continue despite the earlier explicit orders came as a relief to both men. What had begun as a single act of battlefield initiative was transforming into a coordinated effort. Over the next 3 hours, the deadly dance continued. German panzer units, accustomed to operating with near impunity behind the Bocage Hedgerows, suddenly found themselves vulnerable in a way they hadn't anticipated. Standard procedure called for tank commanders to direct their vehicles from the open hatch, particularly in the restricted visibility of the hedgerow country. Now that necessary exposure had become a fatal liability. Thornton's technique evolved as the morning progressed. He discovered that the muddy water in his cup created a more diffuse, harder-to-locate reflection than clear water would have. He varied the duration of his light flashes, sometimes a quick flicker to draw attention, sometimes a steady beam to momentarily dazzle or distract. He even used Miller's polished steel mirror compass as an alternative reflector when the angle required it. By midday, word of the mysterious sniper taking out Panzer commanders had spread among the American units in the sector. Forward observers began deliberately calling in tank locations to Thornton's position. The local battle had transformed. German armor no longer moved with impunity, and their remaining vehicles were forced to operate buttoned up with severely restricted visibility that limited their combat effectiveness. The psychological impact on the German forces became increasingly evident. Radio intercepts, translated hastily by intelligence officers, revealed growing confusion and concern. One captured message from a Panzer Company commander to his battalion headquarters was particularly revealing: unknown American super weapon targeting commanders exclusively. Request immediate air reconnaissance of sector. Cannot operate effectively with hatches closed. The German response was predictable: a concentrated artillery barrage aimed at suspected sniper positions, including the farmhouse where Thornton and Miller had established themselves. The first shells began falling shortly after noon. Time to move, Miller said as plaster and debris showered down from the already damaged attic ceiling. Thornton nodded, carefully packing his essential equipment, including the now famous tin cup of muddy water. Southeast corner of the orchard gives us a good angle on the eastern approaches, he suggested as they hurriedly descended the rickety farmhouse stairs. They relocated 3 times over the afternoon, each time setting up Thornton's increasingly refined reflection system. By using multiple reflective surfaces, the water cup, Miller's compass, and eventually a small shard of mirror salvaged from the farmhouse bathroom, they could create momentary distractions from different angles, confusing the German tankers about the true location of the threat. As the afternoon wore on, the psychological advantage grew. German tank units became increasingly hesitant to advance, and those that did move did so with commanders fully buttoned up, severely limiting their tactical awareness. This created opportunities for American bazooka teams to approach much closer than would normally be possible, resulting in several additional Panzer kills. By 1600 hours, the combined effect of Thornton's sniper operation and the conventional anti-tank efforts had eliminated 19 German armored vehicles from the battlefield, an unprecedented achievement that transformed what had been planned as a minor advance into a significant breakthrough in the sector. The final Panzer commander fell at 1623 when Thornton, now operating from a shallow drainage ditch alongside a sunken road, created a complex triple reflection using all 3 reflective surfaces simultaneously. The disoriented German officer, attempting to locate the source of the bewildering light signals, exposed himself just long enough for Thornton's 19th precisely aimed shot of the day. As dusk approached, the remaining German armor in the sector withdrew to regroup, allowing American forces to secure several key objectives that had been contested for days. What had begun as a single act of battlefield initiative, one soldier's decision to disobey orders when the situation demanded it, had evolved into a tactical innovation that would soon be studied throughout the Allied forces in Normandy. Baker Company's advance, which had begun with such uncertain prospects in the morning, concluded with the secure occupation of 3 critical crossroads and a forward observation post that provided visibility over German positions toward St-Lo. Captain Lawrence, who had given the original orders restricting sniper engagements to infantry targets, personally made his way to Thornton's final position as darkness fell. "Thornton," the captain said simply, extending his hand, "I don't know whether to court-martial you or recommend you for a Silver Star." "Just doing what needed doing, sir," Thornton replied, his exhaustion evident as he carefully cleaned his rifle, the mud-filled tin cup still sitting beside him. 19 tank commanders, Lawrence said, shaking his head in disbelief. Intelligence thinks you single-handedly devastated elements of 3 separate Panzer companies. They're calling it the Bocage miracle at battalion headquarters. Miller, overhearing this conversation, interjected. It wasn't a miracle, sir. It was mud in a cup and a farm boy who understood light. Captain Lawrence looked thoughtfully at the simple tin cup. I want a full report, Thornton. Every detail of this reflection technique by tomorrow morning. This could change how we fight in this whole damned hedgerow country. Thornton nodded, too tired for words. He had fired only 19 rounds over nearly 10 hours, a remarkably small expenditure of ammunition for such significant battlefield impact. But the mental strain of the precision shooting, combined with the constant movement to avoid German counterfire, had left him utterly drained. As night fell over the Norman countryside, the significance of the day's events was still being assessed by American command. What was clear, however, was that one soldier's decision to innovate, to see opportunity where doctrine saw only restriction, had created a pivotal moment in the brutal hedgerow fighting. Thornton sat against a tree, finally allowing himself to truly rest, the tin cup of now-dried mud still clutched in his hand like a talisman. Miller brought him a ration of K-rations and coffee. You know they'll want you to teach this to every sniper in the European theater now, Miller said as he sat beside his partner. Not much to teach, Thornton replied quietly. Just farm boy tricks using what's available. Farm boy tricks that killed 19 Panzer commanders and broke open this sector, Miller corrected him. Don't downplay what happened today, Mike. You changed something fundamental. As the stars emerged above the ancient Norman landscape, neither man could have fully understood just how prophetic those words would prove to be. The aftermath of Michael Thornton's unprecedented success against German armor unfolded in ways that neither he nor anyone in the 28th Infantry Division could have anticipated. The morning after his remarkable achievement, Thornton was summoned not to a disciplinary hearing for disobeying orders, but to division headquarters. There he found not only his own commanding officers, but representatives from Army intelligence and even a British liaison officer. For 3 hours, Thornton explained and demonstrated his reflection technique using the same humble tin cup and mud that had proven so devastatingly effective the previous day. Engineers and intelligence officers took detailed notes and photographs, immediately recognizing the broader applications of the method. It's not complicated, sir, Thornton explained to the assembled officers. The mud in the water creates a diffuse reflection that's harder for the enemy to pinpoint than a clear mirror would be. The enemy sees the flash but can't quite locate its source. When they try to identify it, they expose themselves just enough. The British liaison, a Major Winterbourne, seemed particularly impressed. Remarkable simplicity, he commented. Reminds one of the desert campaigns, using natural elements against the enemy's standard procedures. Within 72 hours of Thornton's innovation, a hastily produced technical bulletin was distributed to sniper units throughout the Allied forces in Normandy, titled Reflection Techniques for Anti-Armor Sniping Operations. It detailed what quickly became known among the troops as the Thornton method, or sometimes simply mud light. Improvised reflective devices, from polished ration can lids to actual purpose-built signaling mirrors, began appearing in sniper kits throughout the front lines. The German response to this new threat was initially confused. Intercepted communications revealed that many German unit commanders believed they were facing a new type of Allied directed energy weapon. One Panzer battalion commander reportedly ordered his men to paint their helmet visors with mud to protect against the American light weapon. It was nearly 2 weeks before German intelligence correctly identified the true nature of the technique, by which time additional dozens of tank commanders had been lost. For Thornton himself, the immediate aftermath brought both recognition and a new set of responsibilities. Though recommended for the Silver Star, the award was downgraded to a Bronze Star with V device for valor, partly because his initial engagement had technically violated orders. The citation carefully worded the achievement as exceptional initiative in developing field expedient methods to counter enemy armor threats. Rather than returning immediately to frontline sniper duties, Thornton was temporarily assigned to train other snipers in his technique. Over the following weeks, as the brutal hedgerow fighting continued, he personally instructed more than 100 Allied snipers, American, British, Canadian, and even Free French, in the various applications of his reflection method. The technique proved adaptable beyond even Thornton's initial conception. British snipers operating with armored units in the eastern sector of the Normandy front developed a variation using multiple reflectors coordinated by a single spotter, creating confusing patterns of light that could distract an entire Panzer crew long enough for anti-tank units to maneuver into position. Canadian snipers integrated the technique with aggressive infiltration tactics, using the reflections to momentarily blind German tank optics during close-in bazooka attacks. By July 1944, as Operation Cobra prepared to break the stalemate in Normandy, German armored units had been forced to adapt their operations significantly. Tank commanders now rarely exposed themselves in combat zones, operating primarily through periscopes with severely limited visibility. This restriction directly contributed to reduced German tactical effectiveness and increased vulnerability to conventional anti-tank measures. More remarkably, the technique found applications beyond anti-armor operations. Snipers discovered that the same reflection principles could be used to momentarily distract machine gun crews, artillery observers, and even infantry officers in defensive positions. The psychological impact spread. German troops began reporting that they felt constantly watched, that American light snipers could strike anywhere. For Michael Thornton personally, the war continued with both triumph and tragedy. He returned to frontline duties in late July, now paired with a new spotter after James Miller was wounded by mortar fire during a separate operation. Thornton continued to refine his techniques through the breakout from Normandy and the subsequent drive across France. By the time Allied forces reached the German border in September 1944, his official confirmed kill count stood at 63, an extraordinary number that included 27 tank commanders or vehicle operators. In October 1944, Thornton was finally awarded the Silver Star for actions near the Belgian town of St. Vith, where he used his reflection technique to help neutralize a German counterattack involving self-propelled guns. The citation specifically mentioned how his methods had become standard doctrine, saving countless Allied lives. Thornton survived the war, fighting through the Battle of the Bulge and the final push into Germany, where his sniper skills proved valuable even in the more open terrain. By victory in Europe Day in May 1945, his reflection technique had been formally incorporated into Allied sniper training manuals and was credited with contributing to the neutralization of over 300 German armored vehicles throughout the European theater. After the war, Thornton returned to Nebraska, married his pre-war sweetheart Ellen Simmons, and used his GI Bill benefits to purchase a small farm not far from where he grew up. Unlike many veterans who rarely spoke of their wartime experiences, Thornton occasionally shared the story of the mud cup with local schoolchildren, using it to illustrate how simple solutions often existed for seemingly impossible problems. In 1952, he received an unexpected letter from the Army Training Command requesting his consultation on a new sniper manual being developed for use in Korea. Though he declined to travel to Washington, Thornton provided detailed written accounts of his techniques and experiences, emphasizing the importance of improvisation and environmental awareness over rigid adherence to doctrine. Perhaps the most telling testament to Thornton's impact came in the form of letters he received over the years from fellow veterans, particularly tank crews who had served in Normandy. One such letter, received in 1958 from a former Sherman commander named Robert Davis, stated simply, "You don't know me, Mr. Thornton, but I commanded a Sherman in Baker Company on June 14, 1944. I was told years later that it was your shooting that prevented my tank from driving into a Panzer ambush that day. My crew of 5 men and I came home because of you. We've lived good lives these past 14 years, raised families, built homes, contributed to our communities. That's 84 years of living you gave us with your mud and light trick. There's no medal that covers that kind of gift." Thornton kept that letter, along with dozens of others, in a small wooden box on his bedside table until his death in 1989 at the age of 68. His obituary in the local Nebraska paper mentioned his Bronze Star and Silver Star, but devoted more space to his contributions to the local farming community and his reputation as a man who could solve just about any problem with whatever he had at hand. The true extent of Michael Thornton's impact on military tactics remained somewhat obscured by time and the classified nature of sniper operations during the Cold War. It wasn't until the publication of Innovative Infantry Tactics of World War II by military historian Dr. Samuel Moyers in 1993 that Thornton's contribution was fully documented for public understanding. Dr. Moyers' research uncovered that variations of the Thornton reflection technique had been incorporated into special operations training for multiple NATO countries throughout the Cold War. The fundamental principle, using simple environmental elements to create advantage, had influenced military thinking far beyond the specific application against tank commanders. A particularly meaningful epilogue to the story emerged during a 1997 reunion of 28th Infantry Division veterans, where James Miller, Thornton's original spotter, then in his mid-70s, shared previously unknown details about that pivotal day in June 1944. Mike never took credit for how thoroughly he had prepared. Miller told the assembled veterans and historians. That mud cup wasn't a spur-of-the-moment idea. He had been experimenting with reflection techniques during our training in England, trying to find ways to temporarily distract targets without giving away our position. The officers discouraged it as trick shooting, not proper sniping, but Mike kept at it, practicing in the early mornings when no one was watching. Miller went on to describe how Thornton had filled multiple canteens with different mixtures: clear water, muddy water, water with varying amounts of soil and clay, testing which created the most effective type of reflection for different conditions. By the time we reached Normandy, he'd worked out that a specific consistency of clay mud created the ideal diffuse reflection, bright enough to catch attention, but dispersed enough to hide its exact origin. This revelation transformed understanding of Thornton's achievement from a moment of battlefield improvisation, remarkable enough in itself, to a case study in methodical innovation operating outside official channels, driven by a frontline soldier's determination to overcome tactical challenges through experimentation and observation. In 2004, 60 years after Thornton's breakthrough in Normandy, the United States Army Sniper School at Fort Benning, Georgia, dedicated a training facility in his honor. The Michael Thornton Advanced Techniques range included specific stations for teaching modern adaptations of his reflection methods, now using sophisticated materials, but still fundamentally based on the principles he had demonstrated with a simple tin cup of muddy water. The plaque at the facility entrance summarizes the lasting impact of one soldier's decision to think differently when confronted with battlefield challenges. Private First Class Michael Thornton reminds us that innovation often comes not from complex technology or elaborate systems, but from the creative application of simple elements available to any soldier with the vision to see beyond established doctrine. His legacy is not merely a technique, but an ethos of adaptability that remains vital to modern warfare. Perhaps the most profound lesson of Michael Thornton's story isn't found in the specific technique he developed, but in the mindset it represents. In the chaos and constraints of combat, he recognized that official doctrine, while built on hard-earned experience, cannot anticipate every battlefield scenario or opportunity. His willingness to trust his own judgment when the situation demanded, it saved countless lives and helped break a tactical stalemate that had cost too many Allied lives in the Norman hedgerows. The mathematics of Thornton's achievement remain staggering even decades later. 19 Panzer commanders neutralized in a single day by one sniper with just 19 rounds of ammunition. German armor operations disrupted across an entire sector. Dozens of American tanks and hundreds of infantry saved from carefully prepared ambushes. The subsequent adoption of his techniques contributing to hundreds more German armored vehicle losses throughout the campaign. All from mud in a tin cup, used by a farm boy from Nebraska who understood how light works. As we reflect on this remarkable story, it's worth considering how many other Michael Thorntons might exist in military history. Men and women whose battlefield innovations never received formal recognition, yet saved lives, and contributed to victory through the same spirit of practical creativity. How many simple solutions to complex problems might have been discouraged by rigid adherence to doctrine or hierarchy? What might we learn from these unsung innovators? The Bocage revealed a truth no orders could hide, that adaptability and innovation at the individual level often determine battlefield outcomes more decisively than elaborate plans or sophisticated equipment. Michael Thornton's mud reflection technique reminds us that sometimes the most effective weapons aren't issued by quartermasters, but created through observation, experimentation, and the courage to try something new when established methods fail. What shocked you most about this unsung hero story? Was it the sheer impact of his innovation? 19 Panzer commanders neutralized with 19 carefully aimed shots. The elegant simplicity of using mud and water to defeat sophisticated German armor. Or perhaps the fact that his technique began as a forbidden experiment, discouraged by the very military hierarchy that would later adopt it as standard doctrine. Comment below and share this story of how one soldier's understanding of light, gained not through military training, but through years of dawn hunting on Nebraska farmland, changed the course of the Normandy campaign and saved countless Allied lives in the summer of 1944.